They just finished recording the album, and I was talking to Nick in Brighton after one of these Leonard Cohen tribute shows, and he'd finished the album a couple of weeks before, and I can remember asking him, what's the new album like? And he very animatedly goes, "It's a beaut."
It came off the back, and quite quickly after Nocturama, really, and Blixer had left, and there was a bit of a new energy around.
It's really mind-blowing to think that the person you first saw in the birthday party is now singing with the London Community Gospel Choir on the first track of the album.
What is it? Get Ready for Love, and it's like,
Get ready for love.
it's like a kind of hurricane, it's just so and it was just hearing it loud, basically. Like, that's an album, I think you have to, it has to have some volume, and it just suddenly, I was absolutely like, I don't know, it was like the tipping point or something happened, and suddenly I was like, this is fucking awesome, and I just, from then on, I've never looked back.
It's just such a gangbuster of a song, just fantastic.
I was on my knees praying to God.
I'm starting to think of religious cults, and that could be they all go to church and sing Get Ready for Love or something.
This song came out as I was just getting out of a church. And I remember hearing it and just snickering to myself because it just hit the nail right on the head. Because it was one of these born-again Pentecostal, hallelujah churches. And it was, he just got it exactly.
There's a line in one of the songs where we say, oh my gosh, what is it? Praise him.
If you've forgotten what you're praising him for, praise him a little bit more.
From a gospel point of view, we could be singing that in church. It's just so apt for us because we could be saying praise him, until you've forgotten what you're so wrapped up in this euphoria of giving thanks and being grateful and, exaltation and all of that. And so you've just forgotten what you're praising him for. You're just so out there.
The whole praise and worship side of that church was humongous. And so to hear this sort of menacing praise and worship style song was just very apt.
Gospel is uplifting. Gospel is about bringing good news to people. And so I think it was very clever for Nick to use gospel singers to bring that exuberance to the songs.
None of them were that aware of Nick Cave or who he was, so they'd read the lyrics and they just get, some of them were quite shocked, and some of them just thought they were funny.
I was just asked one day to do a recording session. We get a lot of inquiries come in. We don't really know what it's all about until we turn up. So, we turn up, I roll up into a recording studio, and I hear it's with Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. To be honest, I wasn't familiar with Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, so I still didn't know what I was in for.
The main thing about them was they would sing the words that were in front of them, and they were given the melody, of course, and then they worked out the harmonies. But the big thing that needed controlling was how long the notes held, because obviously with that kind of singing there's a lot of held notes where they're sort of in that kind of gospel way. So it was really important that they all finish at the same time, and it wasn't always that obvious where that should happen. So Nick would get up and conduct them, and he was like, right, when I go like this, you stop.
I just thought, oh my God, this band is intense.
You've got to hear it if someone describes it. Or Nick Cave is being backed by a gospel choir. You start feeling a little bit queasy and think, I'd like to hear this. Is it going to work? And then you hear it and go, bloody hell, it does work.
I really enjoyed Cannibal's Hymn.
He writes songs which you can really spend a lot of time with, basically. And it's worth spending time with them. They actually change through repeated listening.
I think I like the dynamic of that song, that it starts off very quiet and moody, and then, then the drums come in and it's really kind of, it's like, it's got this big kind of, I love the swagger of it almost when the drums come in, and how powerful that feels.
I had spent the early 90s as the drummer in Gal and Drunk, And our singer, James Johnston, his brother had written the Bad Seed biography of Nick.
Iain, my brother, had written a book about the Cramps, and he, had this idea to write a book about Nick Cave.
James had various dealings with the Bad Seeds over the years.
Because he'd played previously with the group when Blixer couldn't make the epic 1994 Lollapalooza tour of America.
Yeah, James was subbing for Blixer on that tour. And James, of course, rejoined ranks later on.
In time for the Lyre of Orpheus.
It was kind of like, almost like a reunion in a way, for me.
So James was in the band on mostly on keyboards on that album.
I think Nick Launay was partly behind saying that the whole band should record it live.
I remember hearing about this studio in Paris.
A beautiful old studio called Ferber.
I just remember his description was that he said there is this fantastic big wood room, and they make the films there, and you come in and you play the violin, and it's fantastic. And I thought, that sounds like the kind of place that we could do a Bad Seeds record, because the description that he had of this big wooden room just sounded perfect. And then I found out that Serge Gainsbourg had done quite a few of his recordings there.
Nick was saying that Nina Simone had recorded there, and he was very, very happy to be doing something in a room where some of those kind of records have been made.
I'm in awe of the how I imagine that they recorded that record together. What I see is, when I hear the record, is this, studio where all the band are, performing together.
So it had this really great atmosphere in there.
And the space that's created around, the atmosphere wherever that record was made. It's the ambience that fills the room as well.
You can't fake that stuff. Some rooms have just got an atmosphere.
You hear every single slide of the snare drum and the brush on the snare. It's like you hear the room where they recorded the sounds. That was awesome.
And that doesn't happen very much these days. The singer standing in with the band, singing along. And in my band, we do that sometimes as well. Like you all get around in a circle and you just play the song. And that's obviously the way people did it for 70 or 80 years. And sometimes something happens that you just don't expect and you can't recreate it.
Quite often when you're making music, I think the real danger is that sometimes you fill up every hole with something, and there's a fear about empty space. And I personally really like that. I like the air that's in between the notes.
That's what you get in that record, I think. A lot of it's like there is the sense of I don't know, you really hear the moment, you really hear what it's about. And
it doesn't matter that you've got loads of the sound of the amps bleeding onto the vocal track. You can get away with that. It doesn't matter if the spirit's there. And I think you can really hear that all over that album. It's got enormous energy because of that method of recording.
I remember waking up in the morning in Paris and going to the studio and not knowing what songs we'd be working on and not knowing how things were going to develop, but just knowing for sure that something amazing was going to happen. So it's extremely exciting. So going in there with butterflies about like what's going to happen today.
It was a really exciting album to make with the band.
Sounds like a band having a great time together.
It's just pure balls out fun.
You hear it and then you're like, holy shit, I have to scrap everything I'm doing. I have to just like make something that will try and replicate the feeling that this thing is giving me.
To me, Albert, I'm a track like Hiding All Away, that track on there, which to me is like, it's got like a fear and faith.
when something like actually like makes you snarl, you're just like listening and you just like make this like sort of pained grimacy face because you don't even know what to like do with this sort of like just fucking sick, like just like vile and awesome sound, violent, just God, I don't know. I'm getting really like sweaty like talking about it, but it's just like the sexiest thing because it's volatile.
It's got that whole Hieronymus Bosch thing. It's dark lyrics, and it's the policeman rubs day cream on his nightstick, and it's he's got that juxtaposition of familiarity and stuff that makes you feel uncomfortable.
And what's great with this is he also gets his echo. He's always getting this echo coming through on the tracks on that song from the backing singers.
I love those sort of songs where there's a call and an answer. So Nick says a line and then we answer him. So he might say, I was hiding there, and we say hiding all the way, hiding.
The gospel singers just out there and they're listening to this in their headphones, and you can see they're going, my God, what are we involved in here? This is like, and obviously they're religious people, and it's all these lyrics. They're just they're cracking up. And you can hear it on the record. I mean, you can hear them laughing, which we kept in.
The priority isn't about getting every single note right and every single inflection and all that sort of stuff. It's more about let's get the right feeling.
The drumming on that track, I mean, it's
sort of going almost in and out of time in places.
And it has this feel of sort of like seasick or wonky or
a real tension with it all, just like really pulling
and just it's like he's playing with like knives or something and not drumsticks. It's just like brutal.
That's what makes music great to listen to. I mean, certainly for me personally, that's what would make you want to listen to something 100 times, is to hear that. You don't want to hear perfection. I mean, it would just be ultimately just boring, really.
I fucking love that song. It's so good. It's so good. In the end, with the chorus, it's just like the walls are falling down.
We scream out, because that is what Nick wanted. There is a war coming, and it's with every fibre of your body.
I mean, Nick had said, I want it to be really loud. It's got to come in and it's got to be really loud. Well, if you can imagine someone like Jim, who's playing the drums on that, who's a big guy who, certainly plays really loud when he wants to. During that song, he's getting louder and louder all the time anyway. So suddenly when that stop comes in, and then he comes in, and it's like, it's just the needles and the tape machine and all this was just like every needle on the desk was just like blistering. It was all like, I remember thinking, I have no idea if this will even play back.
I was actually at a friend of mine's studio, so we had the luxury of, pretty dominating speakers, and we put it on. It was just like that fucking commercial with the Sony dog or whatever, where it's just sort of like, all of a sudden you realize it's the end of the song and you're completely like literally blown back in your seat.
It's nuts. It's probably the loudest thing I've ever recorded.
Another one I love is Messiah's Ward.
That is the track, isn't it, where it starts and he's like, I hope you're sitting comfortably. I saved you the best seat in the house, right up in the front row. And that, like, it could just end. It could just end after that. After that,
the composition, the way it's put together, and the lines that we have to sing, it's just so beautiful. Yet you could be singing about something so sort of maybe heart-wrenching or depressing or, gut-wrenching, but yet the melody is so sweet.
The way he uses his voice to kind of manipulate the words, just... Well, I mean, if I could say exactly what it was, it probably wouldn't be so good, but it does something which is just, like, awesome.
First time I met Nick Cave was when he won the Godlike Genius Award. Is that what they call it at the Q Awards? And the person who was with him knew I was a massive fan, and I was doing daytime radio at the time, and I'd played There She Goes My Beautiful World a couple of times. much to the chagrin of playlist teams. And I just met him in a corridor, and he said hello, and he shook my hand, and I was just, I said nothing that made any sense.
I recently played the Plug Awards, and Nick was the headliner, and we were sort of, bringing in gear and setting up and whatever, and some of the bad seats were on stage sound checking, and it's like I didn't even see him, but I felt him before he passed me, and I sort of it was sort of a movie moment of Nick Cave is walking, and he's so tall and sort of just has this presence.
He just is there, even when he's not on stage. He's just this kind of person who walks in the room and you gotta notice him.
And he doesn't even walk. He float swaggers, and so it was just hair blown back. He just float. I swear to God, it looked like he was floating.
But on stage, he has that same thing. It's just something about him. It's just there are no words you could put to it, man. It's just a presence.
But it was just this sort of cologne of virility, just over everything, just this aura of just man, it was so cool.
He's kind of the man I'd want to be, someone who gets better looking as he gets older.
When Nick went on tour, he was doing virtually the entire album. Now, when most bands do that, it's the kiss of death.
The first half was just new songs as well, and that was such a confident thing to do.
There was great fun that tour, because it was like this fulfilling this fantasy I've always had of being in a kind of soul review band or something, with these backing singers and everything. You'd look around and it was just massive.
There She Goes, My Beautiful World, for instance, is probably, a really key track on that record, and a version that should probably have been the single and would have represented that album really well, but somehow it just didn't get formulated in that way.
It should have been a #1 song on the hit parade, and I think it's an indictment of the state of popular song that was not a #1 track worldwide.
Very few songs in the world are perfect from start to finish, and that song for me, I won't sing it because it'll be embarrassing, but from the opening and the way it builds and builds, and when you think it just can't build any more, it builds even more. It explodes so many times.
That song reminds me of something off the first Tim Rose record. It's got that kind of Bernard Purdie shuffle on the drums.
I can listen to that song. I could put it in a playlist and have it 100 times in a row, and every time it would give me goosebumps. It's the most perfect love song, and it's probably about urinary infection or something.
He was talking about the conditions under which people write,
Well, I believe he's speaking about the power of the muse, and he references so many famous people throughout history.
My dear friend John Peel had died just before that record came out, and it made you wonder if whether you should still keep playing music. Obviously you should. He wouldn't want you to stop playing music just because he died. But I found that track inspirational. The song is about getting writer's block, really, and not carrying on. And it kicked me up the arse and made me finish a record.
Johnny Wilmot penned his poetry riddled with a pox. Nabokov wrote on index cards and had a lectern in his socks. St. John of the Cross did his best stuff imprisoned in a box. And Johnny Thunders was half alive when he wrote Chinese Rocks. I mean, that gets you right here.
It's the physical conditions of whoever sitting there writing this while either suffering from this disease or Vladimir Nabokov sitting there in his socks at a lectern, getting comfortable. And I think what Nick said was it was a general, he called it a desperate calling out for the muse.
I saw him do it live at Brixton with the full gospel choir at the back of the stage, and he must have woke up that morning and said, right. And the whole gig was just, it is the best gig I've ever been to, and that one moment, me and my friend, who's a massive fan, decided that was the pinnacle. We weren't ever going to see anything live as good as that again.
It was like seeing your favourite player, football simile, but it was like seeing your favourite player pick up the ball on their own goal line, and they've got to run past 10 other players. And every time another song came in and was perfectly performed, and the gospel backing singers were absolutely perfect, it was past another and another and another. And by the time he reached the end of There She Goes, My Beautiful World, I can remember just standing, turning to Colin and just being slack-jawed in amazement at the fact that he'd scored the goal. This was, it was perfect.
He wasn't a musician when he toured that album, the Abattoir Blues tour. He wasn't a musician, he was a preacher, he was a storyteller. That's what's great about him. That song for me is just mind-blowing.
And one of the other great things about going to see them live is that if ever you need proof of Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds status, it's to go to a Nick Cave gig and look around the crowd. And when you look around the crowd and see invariably the chart-topping songwriters of that time all stood in the crowd, all watching his every move, you appreciate the significance and the importance and the influence of Nick Cave. You might not be able to hear it in a David Gray record, but I've seen him at a few gigs. You might not hear it in a Beth Orton record, but I've seen her at a few.
Like one gig, I just cried the whole way through, just sobbed, pouring out. It's like a kind of, I don't know, baptism or something by my own tears, like.
I can't think of, to be honest, I can't think of anybody else that that I've seen over the years that I admire as a performer as much as Nick Cave.
The greats are compelling in whatever it is that they do, because what they're expressing is somehow essential, and it's, you know, people want to witness that because it's very real.
Great performers are able to deliver these feelings and put them, make them present, make them appear in front of one's eyes.
It takes a lot of strength, and it takes a lot of willpower and a lot of ego.
There's so many moves and gestures that Nick sort of invented. It's like pulling down the energy from the sky and screaming into the microphone. The whole act of balancing on the edge of the foldback wedges and completely letting himself go and ride on the music.
There's this arrow that they seem to form, this arrow of energy as players presenting Nick at the pinnacle, the point of it, where he can embrace the audience but attack them at the same time. Everything seems to be pointing off this stage with this fierce energy.
It's powerful live. It's the most, it's a direct hit.
A great gig and a great Nick Cave gig is a religious experience. They're spiritual, and I think he's got that down to a T.
He's everything that I want to see and feel and experience if I go and see someone perform. He throws himself into the performance.
And he's just such a versatile personality, going from a kind of like loungy vibe with his stage presence to just full on, crazed rock and roll.
What he's doing and what he's doing what he always has been doing is this very brave and very fearless way of submitting himself to his art.
Abattoir Blues was very enjoyable for me because it was we were on such a roll creatively, I think.
There was just loads and loads of songs, and and we ended up just doing the whole lot. I don't think anything was dropped, actually.
There were just so many songs coming out. It was quite amazing.
Even the one about the ape got done.
The Fable of the Brown Ape, this short song, right at the end, another song that's right at the end of a record. It's right at the end, and the way he uses the backing chorus as just like a thunder, like slamming into the song, and where it's just this song moving along slowly and steadily, telling the story, and then every time the chorus comes in, it's this loud shock of noise almost. It's like using a choral group as noise, which almost seems like a contradiction in terms.
A perfect album ender.
The best albums do that, I think, end you with that shock or bolt and make you kind of, it makes you feel unfinished, that you didn't have a completion, that you need to go back to it again to reinterpret what's going on and to perfectly apprehend what's happening. And Abattoir Blues, I feel like, is one of those records.
Once it was decided that there was enough material for 2 albums, which I think happened sort of halfway through the basic recording, say the 11 days, 12 days in Paris while recording, about halfway through that, it was suddenly like, wow, these songs are all turning out really good and there is enough material and it is strong enough.
Warren came up with this idea to do it as a double album, and I think the inspiration was, very wisely, was Physical Graffiti has one record that's more ballady and one that's rocking, and it tended to be that some of the heavier ones had Jim drumming, and the more jazzy or intricate ones tended to be Tommy.
Thomas is a great field drummer. He just has, he does tend to swing quite a bit, whereas Jim rocks. And there's nothing wrong with either of those things, and to have both of them in the same band is fantastic.
All the songs that Jim played drums on are on one album, and all the ones where Tommy played drums on are on the other.
The contrast of those 2 records, the double album, I think was quite brilliant, to be quite honest.
When the Lyre of Orpheus came out, we were just launching our myth series where we were getting people writers to take a myth of their choice and retell it over kind of 150, 160 pages.
I love the Lyre of Orpheus, just the imagery.
I remember playing that track to Margaret Atwood and her absolutely loving it, just thinking it was so brilliant the way he'd taken this classic story of, it's a bold thing for a musician to do, to take on the story of the greatest musician who ever lived.
I just love the idea of Cave taking over his personality, and the idea of him sitting in a shed trying to make his lyre out of lumps of wood and bits of glue.
It's so mischievous and playful and kind of and subverted and twisted.
Driving in my car with my 12-year-old in the back who recites every single word from that song. He's just studied Greek mythology at school, so it's really it's inspiring to hear poetry from a gruff pre-adolescent in the back.
The Lyre of Orpheus takes this kind of mythologized great figure, this musician, and if not ridicules him, I think probably does ridicule him, certainly kind of turns this myth of the great musician kind of on its head, and also this love story on its head.
It's demythologizing and kind of taking the piss out of him slightly, but at the same time, then he then riffs with that, and it becomes incredibly violent. The fact that this poetic power is so intense that it explodes his wife.
I have to admit, I wasn't a huge sort of fan. I didn't really know the stuff when I was a kid, and someone sent me this CD, and it was probably the least Nick Cave-like song on it, a song called Breathless.
Yeah, Breathless is where the description of going through the woods and all the animals and them all just speaking of his love.
It was a funny introduction to Nick Cave stuff because it's such a pop song and such a recent song that you go back having heard songs about or lyrics about gambling lambs and fluffy white clouds.
We chose Breathless as our choice of wedding song.
There's kind of a number of reasons. I really like that song. I love the lyrics, and I love the feel of the tune.
The previous year, we'd both had a lot of loss and tragedy in our families, and we were living in a place where I really wanted to move from.
When we moved into our house, I think that was the first song, or I think it was the first song that we played as we sat down to celebrate start of a new change in our lives.
That night we decided to get married, and the same night we conceived our little boy that we've got now.
And then when we were choosing the music, we thought that would be a good song.
Breathless is a great first dance. Not least because you do get that moment of people actually starting to smile along and think, when they first hear it kick in, they go, is that flute broken?
So there's this idea that that Warren would have to go out and play flute like Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull. He'd have to stand on one leg and play the flute. And to add to it, we got Warren to wear like a caftan. I think it wasn't a caftan, it was just some kind of sheet that was lying around. And then we put candles around in a circle for him to stand in.
And I have this continuing argument with my girlfriend about how she hates flutes, and I think there's a good place for them in music. And I use this as Exhibit A.
Then it was like, all right, come and have a listen. And the assistant engineer we had, we said, it was like, well, which take? And he said, oh, just play them all together. So played back all these takes. It's probably about 10 different flute takes all at once, and played it all back together. And it just sounded ridiculous, but absolutely had this feeling of lightness and sort of fairies and all that, and little bunny rabbits hopping around.
But then you watch the video and there are these CGI bunnies hopping around trying to get into the room where the band is performing, and then there's a little CGI fox picking them off one by one, munching on little CGI bunny heads. And it's like, okay, you know what, there it is. You know, even when it's happy, there's something else there, and I think that's what keeps everything interesting.
There's two that I play all the time, and it's partly because they're one after the other on the CD. It's one's called Breathless, and the one after it called Babe, You Turn Me On.
I, in fact, had kind of skipped over Breathless as an option for a wedding song to begin with, because I hadn't really listened to the lyrics, and I thought, the third song would be better, but it turned out it wasn't quite appropriate for a wedding song.
I feel a connection. I've been in a very long-term relationship, and I know there's strength in love and people can stay together, but there has to be a spark and a fire. And when he utters those little words, my hand down your panties, I tell you, sitting in the audience as a woman of my age who is in a long-term relationship, who has spark in her life, it's like, yeah, touche, baby, you know?
It sort of sounds like it's been written very knowingly, but, there's a real, love in it, and it's just, I can't really put my finger on what it is, but I just think that song has the power to, I don't know, make you fall in love with someone or understand what it feels like.
My favourite bit of that is when he makes, where he says, you turn me on like an atom bomb, and he makes the sound of a bomb going off, which I really like,
That line blows my mind. When I first heard that lyric, I was blown away. It sounds really simple, but it resonates really deeply.
Yeah, for me, that'll always be a really, really powerful song. I've listened to it probably about 1,000 times, and each time I listen to it, I find something new, a little nuance, something interesting that it just never gets old. And it's just, every time I hear it, it's so exciting, and it's just a beautiful song to listen to.
I think that pretty much the way these songs would come about is that Warren would start the loop, and it has a certain motion to it, a rhythm, and in a rhythm within it. Sometimes that rhythm might be very subtle, but it's definitely there, and there's a tempo to it.
You can hear Nick doing things in there that he's never done before, and trying stuff out, and I just think, for me, that's the most beautiful, perfect record.
I think Nick described it as, as really big themes and really big music, and that was part of the idea, I think. But it was different themes to what Nick had been engaged with for the previous, however many, 8 years or whatever.
He kind of went back to that intensity, to that bringing in the bravura and grandiousness of music to really slap people around and shock and amaze people.
It doesn't matter if the music is different from one album to the next or critically well received or not. It doesn't seem to matter. He's this artist on a roll, and I think that seems to come across from the recordings, is that they are They are literally fearless.
I just think it's a really brave record. It just sounds like the whole band just really just went, right, what are we going to bring to this? And they just got in there.
Yeah, the mood that's created by the combination of all these things, it is just sometimes mesmerising, and it's something that's unique to the Bad Seeds. I mean, there's no other band that I can think of that does this in this way. There's some bands out there that have very cleverly worked, really hard in the studio to create a mood by overdubbing and overdubbing and overdubbing, and they do these albums that take sometimes a year. I mean, I could think of quite a few bands that create a similarly strong mood to their records, but it's not something that's made in 3 hours like a Bad Seeds song.
It's kind of the culmination of a sound that they'd been doing since No More Shall We Part. It's just where that sound finally becomes it just crosses over into the ether. It becomes something else, something vaporous almost.
Supernaturally is just a standout song for me.
The opening line, through the wind-swept coastal trees, and that rhythm of that music it's like standing out on a point.
It's the piano, it's the intensity of the chords, it's the pace of them.
It's a love song, but it's like really a wanting song, but it's like in that moment there's no like futuristic like thing about it is how it's going to be. It's just that moment of you want somebody, you think that person maybe wants you too, but it's just that moment where you kind of that's I like that.
The feelings that evokes, the feelings that he obviously has for that person that he's talking about. It's like, you're magically everywhere and I can't get you out of my head.
I keep finding myself playing the last 3 tracks over and over again, just because they're the most spooked out tracks on the whole thing.
To me, there's quite a few songs that almost have a similarity about them in that they are mostly driven by a loop of that Warren has come up, which immediately gives you a mood. I would say this is mainly on the Lyre of Orpheus album, like songs like Spell, Oh Children.
Oh Children was a song that stopped me dead in my tracks, and I had to go and give my iPod to my wife and said, "You've got to listen to this because it's amazing."
I've got 2 kids, Marley and Leo, and I've played that to them. They love it as well. We played in the car really loud, and it's just like it's another song that just kind of lifts you.
The gospel singers on that song are absolutely incredible. It's they just swell up gradually and build into a crescendo that is quite breathtaking.
I just find those songs really deeply affecting.
It still has the same effect on me as it did the first time I heard it.
It's not like in your face. It's more, it knocks on the back door and then kicks your ass, That's what I like about it.
I think the Lyre of Orpheus and Abattoir Blues might be the only double album of which there is nothing dispensable. That's an extraordinary achievement. I can't think of another one. A double album? I don't think you hear Stadium Arcadium by the Chili Peppers and go, no, you couldn't have trimmed anything from that. Most double albums you can, and that album you can't.
It's a very big work, Abattoir Blues. I think it's kind of a fantastic record. And in an odd way, it relates back to the way the Bad Seeds were earlier, in a lot of ways. The way we were before the Boatman's Call, but it's also quite different because it gives I wouldn't have known that at the time, but it gives the clue to where things have kind of gone now, which is into a quite different world in a way, quite a different approach to the whole group.
onward I go, where no man before can be bothered to go, till the soles of my shoes are shot full of holes, and it's all downhill with a bullet. This rambling and roving is taking its course. I'm grazing with the dinosaurs and the dear old horses, and the city streets crack and a great hole forces me down. My soapbox, my pulpit, the theater ceiling, the silver star spangled, and the coins in my pocket go